So, good afternoon, bienvenidas y bienvenidos. I'm really glad to have the chance to moderate this panel about European journalism. As an Italian working in Spain, in Spanish media for 14 years now, I'm a bit, let's say, the expression of this existence of a European journalist that can cross borders and nationalities. And it's a real pleasure to have the chance to debate with other colleagues from other big European newspapers about how we cover European issues and what kind of journalism we need for what kind of Europe. We have not so much time, so let's start. I will introduce you our panelist. Catherine Butler is the Associate Editor for Europe of The Guardian. And James Randerson is the Editorial Director, Innovation and Platform at Politicalo Europe. Francesco Guerrera is Deputy Director at La Repubblica. Sarah Cooper, Technical Project Manager at My Country Talks, Europe Talks. And Andres Hill, our correspondent in Brussels. Let's start, and I will do a first round of questions. I will ask you to be very brief in your answer. So, Catherine, as I told before, is now the Guardian Associate Editor at the Guardian Associate Editor for Europe. But before you were working at the opinion desk during the years when Brexit became a reality. First as a debate, then as a referendum, and then as a fact. I would like to ask you how the interest for European issues has changed in the UK in the last few years, and if there has been a debate, not only at The Guardian, but in general, about how you use it to cover European issues, and if you had the need to change something.
Yeah, that's a really great question, Angela. So I think the first thing to say is that there was a paradox about Brexit in that it allowed the process took so long. I mean, from the referendum in 2016 till the moment we were told it had happened, and actually it still hasn't happened fully. But that process took so long that it allowed a debate to happen that had never happened in the previous 25 or 30 years. So a lot of people in Britain who were either pro-European, sort of vaguely, or they hadn't really given it much thought, but they thought it was generally a good thing. I think the process and the endless debates allowed those people to kind of come out of the closet as really having an emotional attachment to Europe. And so although they accepted that there had been a democratic decision to leave, they really became more determined to stay connected. And they understood then, that after all those discussions about hard Brexit, soft Brexit, the backstop, the Northern Ireland Protocol, they understood just how deeply integrated the British economy was with the EU economy, and so they knew it wasn't going to be easy. The other point is that it was ironic that just within weeks of Brexit happening, the official date of it happening, we were struck by the pandemic, and this, of course, reinforced the interconnectedness of Europe as a set of countries, as a people, and our codependency. So, if our neighbours were making a decision about masks or whether you could leave your house, it was going to have an effect on you. And Britain's geography couldn't be changed. So, even though at this time the British government was using, I think, was seeing the pandemic and the response to it as almost a way to declare its not supremacy, but superiority over Europe. You remember the vaccine, endless discussion about the vaccines and who was first and who was better, and Britain was world-beating and so on. But that couldn't hide the fact that we were completely interdependent and that those connections couldn't be removed just because of our geography. So yeah, I think that that's, and of course now we have Ukraine, so that's also reinforced that connection. I think on your question about whether it has made us reflect on the coverage, I think. The Guardian, we made a decision in 2020, before 2020, that whatever happened, we were going to remain in Europe. We were going to reinforce our presence and expand even, and do more and do it more deeply. And really, we have it's a tricky thing because of it has been tricky because of the pandemic. But I think we have really brought Europe more, even more into the DNA or the bloodstream of The Guardian on a daily basis in all our decisions. And now we think about what are the stories, how does it compare in Europe? We want to do those comparisons all the time. I think, unfortunately, Brexit is still being used in the sections of the right-wing media in Britain and by the conservative elements of the hardline Brexiters. They're still using Brexit as an excuse. It's almost like an ideology. So if you thought Europe was going to go away as an issue in Britain after Brexit, sorry, it's just never going to go away. So now the reason is that Brexit is causing real pain for businesses. Businesses can't get the staff, they can't get the workers they need at the pay rates they're prepared to pay. The painstaking work of preparing business for Brexit wasn't really done before it happened. So now it's happening. Now it's taking effect. And it's causing a lot of pain. But we can't even, there isn't much debate about where does the fault lie. The fault is Europe again. So, for much of the media is, unfortunately pro-Brexit, and they constantly repeat this refrain of Brussels is now making it difficult. So the problem isn't Brexit. The problem is these petty tyrants in Brussels who are not letting us implement Brexit the way we wanted, and they're determined to, break up the United Kingdom. We see this. We've seen recently this big debate over the Northern Ireland Protocol. That's being kind of missold to the British people as a problem created by Brussels rather than a problem created by Brexit.
Yeah, thank you, Catherine. I will change a bit the program because, as Catherine is mentioning, the use by the government of this Brussels is asking something. I would like to ask to Andres. Andres, you arrived in Brussels in 2018, if I'm right, and it was supposed to be the moment when Europe will enjoy the recovery after a decade of huge crisis. And we had a pandemic, and now the war in Ukraine. How we can handle with this attitude from our governments, not only in the UK? Brussels is asking something. How for you, and how difficult has been for you in the last years to handle with that?
Well, it's very interesting. With great media like La Repubblica, Politico, The Guardian, Europe Talks. This is a great panel. We can learn a lot from them. But the Brussels issue, the European Union in reality, at the end of the day, is just the decision making of 27 countries. There are common institutions. There are like the central bank, the Court of Justice. There are these kind of institutions, but at the end of the day, the decision making, the process of the sign of the Brexit is with the 27 28 in that time. The recovery fund is also a decision making of 5 days and 5 nights in July in 2020 between the leaders trying to find a solution. So we can blame Brussels many times. This kind of leaders, but also in the media. In the media, this morning we were talking about fake news, and this week I saw a front page in one tabloid in Britain. The story was something like this: after 18 years, we are coming back with the symbol of the Queen in the glass of paints because we are now. We have unchained Britain from the European Union. Well, this is a fake news, and it was like the whole page, the whole front page. But this is a lie. I mean, they I don't know why the British people removed the symbol of the Queen from the glass of paint, but it has nothing to do with the European Union. Yeah. And this happens every day. I mean, the other day when Viktor Orban was bargaining with the other 26 about the embargo of the petrol from Russia. Afterwards, they got an agreement. They released a tweet, and they say, and the motto was, a father is a man, a woman is a mother, and the gallon will not cost more than 400. I don't know the currency in Hungary. So they mix everything. They mix everything, like it happens with Poland. So, well, it's our work to try to explain this, but there are countries where they don't have the same freedom of speech and the same freedom of, even in the European Union, freedom of press. But I think that our work job is to try to explain this, that the Brussels is not an entity, a big entity. It's where everything passes through at the beginning, at the middle stage, or maybe at the end in the European Court of Justice. But the managing of all the things are the governments. Maybe we would like to be something different. Maybe we would like to be a federal European Union, but the European Union is a union of 27 governments.
And Andres, how is Spain seen from Brussels?
Well, I've been asked this question many times, but I think that Spain is seen quite good. I mean, here in Spain, we try to be very autocritic or self-criticism. But I don't know if you saw the final of the champions last Saturday. If they would have happened in Spain instead of Paris, I mean, we would be killing each other. I mean, because of the bad management of the thing. No? But Spain is the first country with the recovery funds. Is the first country with Portugal with this exception for the gas. I mean, Spain is getting things in Brussels that it was difficult to imagine. I mean, at this context, it's quite well considered, and also we have a great sun and people have fun in Spain. But I mean, it's quite. I think the demand is well seen in Brussels. Yeah, I think so.
Thank you, Andres. James, I remember when Politico Europe came out 7 years ago now.
Yes.
We were all enthusiastic about, they are arriving here, but we were also wondering if it will have the same success of the American version, and it did. You are director also of innovation. How innovation and new formats also counted in this success?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me and allowing me to both bask in the sunshine and also the glory of Champions League victory. I'm enjoying that a lot. Yes, so as you say, Politico started up in the US about 15 years ago, and I think there were a few in Brussels who were kind of looking slightly askance when Politico said, these Americans aren't going to really understand Europe properly. Yeah. And I think I can't take any credit for this. I've been with Politico about 5 years now. Actually, Francesco was there nearer the beginning, so you might want to ask him too. But I think they decided on a few things early on. The approach was to say, we will view Europe through a European lens rather than a national lens. So a lot of the coverage of Brussels as an entity, in all its complexity, as we were just hearing, is through a national lens, and that can sometimes really distort what is actually going on. We also, as our colleagues in the US do, take Brussels as being a center of power in its own right that deserves serious coverage, and that sort of approach that is sometimes used in the British press, certainly, of saying, faceless bureaucrats have done, or Eurocrats have done X. We've really tried to put a face to those people and hold them to account, but also humanize them for good or ill, I suppose. And the other thing about Politico is it's sort of fiercely non-partisan. So we're not coming from one political viewpoint or another. You asked about innovation of formats, and that leads me on to another part of Politico's success, I think, which is that the business model is underpinned by what we call our pro coverage. And this is behind a very high paywall. It's essentially, we call it actionable intelligence on what's going on in Brussels. So people who need to know about legislative moves, who's lobbying for what, which commissioners are trying to introduce certain things, people who need to know that sort of stuff in real time, we provide that kind of insider information for a relatively small number of people in companies and in national governments and in NGOs and in consultancies and so on. But they pay quite a high, more than the sort of the subscription price for the New York Times or something. So that has been the core of our business model and is now accounts for about 60% of our revenue. And part of the product innovation behind that is marrying up the journalism. So we have a newsroom of about 120 people, of whom about 80 of them are in Brussels, and a lot of those are real policy specialists who can go out and get super nerdy details on the latest, directive as it's going through the kind of Brussels sausage factory. And we marry that sort of human journalistic information with loads and loads of data that we scrape from the Brussels institutions. So you can track legislation on this platform, which is for subscribers, and then if you're interested in a particular bill, you can find out who are the MEPs who are lobbying or talking about it. You can then match that up with our stories that are relevant to it, and all of those connections behind the scenes make for a really powerful tool for people who need very, very specific information and need to get it really quickly. So that's one side of it, and then we've innovated around some of our free products as well. But so things like bundling up newsletters with coverage and with events. One final thought. One of the things that sort of weighs on our mind is Politico is very reliant on email newsletters, and that's something that the whole industry is now doing. Everyone's writing newsletters, and you can write your own if you go to Substack. But our sort of worry for the future is there a point when people stop reading email, and the younger people are not using email so much. So is there going to come a point where that doesn't work anymore? And what's the next way of distributing? And I don't think we've come up with the answer for that yet. I'm not sure anyone has.
It's not good news for us, because we would like to copy from you as we did with the newsletter, but
I think we're okay.
We will wait for the answer at some point.
It's all right for the time being. It's a few years hence, maybe, I hope. But anyway, we'll see.
Well, everybody in Brussels read the paper at 7 a.m. every day in the morning. Yeah.
Not only in Brussels.
I'm glad you said that. Not
Yes, indeed.
I'll pass that on.
And James, how has the way you speak about Europe changed in the last few years?
I mean, I wouldn't say that Politico has really changed its approach because, as I was saying, we started off saying this is, we're coming from a European perspective here, not any particular national perspective. What we try to do is join the dots between national capitals and Brussels and really help readers understand those dynamics because, the myth about Brussels, as you were saying, is that the power is with the Commission, and sure, the Commission has loads of power, but it's the Council where the national governments exert their influence very strongly that is much harder to report on because it's very secretive, and all of these deliberations go on behind closed doors, there are no public minutes and so on, so finding out what's really going on is really hard because you need to kind of cross-check. Basically, everyone who's telling you anything, any diplomat, obviously, is giving you their national spin on whatever the discussion was. And this was a real journalistic challenge, where it constantly is, but particularly during the Brexit talks, which I know a lot about because I was editing our coverage on Brexit for those few years. Actually, what you were talking about sort of brought back lots of horrible memories. But anyway, it was the fact that that is so difficult to cover is part of what we're able to do by sort of cross-referencing what the Italian diplomat says with what the Spanish diplomat says, what the Maltese says, and so on. So we've really sort of carried on doing that. I suppose our ambition is to expand more and more beyond Brussels and to be the kind of pan-European English language politics and policy publication that allows you to understand, European politics in the round. And, just to finish off, I think, you can't. I was trying to. You asked me earlier on, what makes a European conversation, what makes a European issue. And I was actually trying to think of any issues that aren't European, don't have a European dimension to them that will not add something to the story. I mean, just taking the three biggest stories over the last 5 or 6 years, there was Brexit, there was the pandemic, and now there's the war on Ukraine. And all of them, if you don't build in the European dimension, it just doesn't really make sense, apropos what you were talking about with the pandemic and comparing approaches of different countries and so on. And so you just have to bake that into your coverage. And, I sometimes in the UK, not The Guardian, but other publications are so one-dimensional in their coverage of Europe. And, I think that's possibly part of the reason for Brexit.
Thank you, James. Francesco, you have worked many years at the Financial Times and at the Wall Street Journal before coming back to Italy, and you have been able to see as an analyst as well how when it comes to economy, the news that comes from Brussels and global affairs in general are read and treated with the focus on national perspective or national interest. So how we get out of this, and how much does it distort the comprehension of European issue at the national level?
Yeah, I think, first of all, thank you for having me on this great panel. As with you, the only representative of the country who's the champions of Europe at national. But yeah, to a serious point, I think the issue is best exemplified by the UK, because the UK has this strident part of the press where they really distort him. But this happens at a national level all the time. Having worked in Brussels, it was remarkable to see we were all witnessing the same events, the same facts, if you like, and then see how everybody went away and reported it differently. Normally, whichever newspaper or publication you were reading from that country had won, right? This is particularly true of France. France always wins every European debate, but it's also true of other countries like my own in Italy. So, as journalists, especially as now working for a big national publication, the biggest enemy, really, is provincialism, right? It's the idea that you filter everything through the national lens to the point that you distort it. The danger there is that you're already living in an ecosystem that fosters tribalism and polarization because of the algorithms, because of all the things you already know, because of the power of the platforms. If legacy media, if traditional media, if respectable media also does that on issues such as Europe, for example, but there's many others, especially on economics issue, then you're really not going. The readers don't have a chance to actually get what is really happening at European level. Now, that said, there are a lot of powerful forces, including our own governments, who push us in that direction, right? There's always a vested interest by every national government to say that they won the battle in Brussels or that they are the best, You said that Spain is first on the recovery fund, but they tell us that Italy is first on the recovery. So you see, now I'm not sure, and I'm going to check her because I was living happily thinking that Italy was first. So you see, that's an issue because relying on our government for this is a problem, right? We need to be more questioning of that, right? And so I think the best thing we can do as journalists, and certainly we in our newsroom try to promote that, is to go beyond the national sphere, right? Which is it's very easy, and journalists can be lazy as well. So they kind of rely on a trusted set of sources. But the important thing, and what we did here this morning is also a step towards that, is to try and get as many sources from outside the country and to open up your horizons to the point that you can actually do that. That said, there are signs of optimism. I think through this crisis, and actually this crisis has proven the worth and importance of a transnational government like the European Union. The European Union arguably has become stronger as a result of this crisis. Now, people who don't like the European Union will tell you that it's another coveted attempt or covert attempt to create a federalist Europe, but there's certainly been a push towards more unity in the European Union because of the responses that they had to concoct to the pandemic. First, actually, the economic crisis, the sovereign debt crisis, then the pandemic, and now this war. So there's actually a positive story to be told as well that perhaps we should do a better job of doing on that. And I want to conclude, I started with football, I conclude with football. The one thing I always remember that we shouldn't do is this. When there was the last kind of big change of power in Russia, that was in the late 80s when Yeltsin came to power. If those of you who remember this, he stood on a tank, and there was a big kerfuffle around the Kremlin. One of the Italian newspapers, Italian sports newspapers, we have 3 Italian sports newspapers, interpreted that geopolitical crisis like this. They said, at that time Italy again had not qualified for the European Championship, and they said, political turmoil in Russia, will Italy go to the European Championship instead? And that is not what you should never do that, right? That's far too national a lens to see a big geopolitical event. You should always open up your mind.
Francesca, it's about out of the debate, but I think that it's interesting also for our subscriber. There has been a debate in Italy about Russian interference in the debate about Ukraine war. Could you please say something about that? A committee of the parliament is investigating, actually, about the interference of Russia.
Yeah, thank you for a horrible question. So, so the reality is that Italy is the most pro-European. We are first in something, which is the most pro-Russian country in Europe, unfortunately. Yeah. And Hungary, yeah, but of the core European countries, we certainly are. And I suspect it's a function of a historical, cultural function of the 2 major cultural influences in Italy, which is the Catholic Church and the Catholic ecosystem and the communist ecosystem, which in Italy was not was pro-Russian, but not so close to Russia as other communist parties in the east of the country during in the east of Europe in the Cold War. So that has kind of translated into this pro-Russian. And in the polls, you can see in the polls even before the war, there was a strong approval rating for Putin in Italy. And that's something we need to confront and dispel and get rid of as soon as possible. But that's something that's very important. And I think this is also translated in the debate, right? Whereas that is a minority. It's a minority, definitely a small minority in Italy. It's been amplified by media, namely television, which gives these people a huge amount of space in the name of plurality and in the name of freedom of speech. Misinterpreting freedom of speech as, everybody has to have the same right to say the same thing, even when they are truly offensive and completely false. And so there's been this issue. Now, the issue you're referring to is whether there is an investigation into whether this is essentially an attempt by Russia to infiltrate Italian culture and Italian media, and that's something that we need to keep an eye on. But even if that wasn't the case, it's still troubling what's happening, that there is an amount of airtime, and it really is airtime because it's mostly on television, which is a big medium in Italy, airtime given to propagandists from the Putin regime who are not really checked or debated enough in those fora. And so it then behooves the rest of the media to be a lot more, a lot stronger in refuting the things that they're saying, and also pointing out that they shouldn't have that kind of space on the national airwaves, so to speak.
Thank you for answering this awful question, Francesco. Speaking about polarization, Sarah, I would like you to explain, because I have prepared a brief presentation of my country talks, but that is an international platform for political dialogue, but I would like you to explain a bit more how does it work, and when did you realize that this project could work?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it works really simply, it's almost too easy to explain. Basically, we ask readers on different news sites and articles online 7 to 9 yes or no questions. Do you think same-sex couples should be able to adopt children? Is your country investing enough in climate change? These really key political questions. And because we work all over the world, we work with media all over the world, and we work with them to find what are those questions that are really key for your country, your city, your society. And then people answer the questions, and we just match them with someone who said the opposite. So if you said yes, we match you with someone who said no, and the two of you have a one-on-one conversation. So it's just the simplest way to literally connect people together. And I think the simplicity is kind of how it started, from a very simple place, a very simple human emotion of, it was 2017. And this is a project that really came from the newsroom of Zeit Online, which is a German newspaper, daily online newspaper. And in 2017, so Trump had been elected. There was a really contentious election in Germany. Brexit was on the table. And it just was kind of who saw this coming? And it's not really easy to ask a question of who saw this coming when literally half, or at times more than half, of an entire country has voted in one direction or chosen one option over the other. And so you think, wow, if 1 out of every 2 people, or more than 1 out of every 2 people in this country feel this way, how is it possible that I've never spoken to a single one of those people? And when you bring that to the level of the newsroom, you think, well, we're journalists. Isn't it our whole job to speak to people and see this coming? And if we can't even get that experience, how is it possible that our readers would ever get that experience? So why don't we just match them with each other? Why don't we literally just ask them what they think and say, do you want to meet someone who thinks completely differently from you? And it could have, at the time, it was a pilot project. It was, let's just put this online, see who signs up. But I think in the first program, 12,000 people signed up. So it had kind of an immediate success that we thought, okay, we're hitting a nerve, that this must be something that people are hungry for. And as we've grown, so we started just with Germany by working with, so Zeit Online is kind of center-left. We work with the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung, which is center-right. So therefore we get those two kind of bases of the political spectrum. We match them with each other, and then we kind of expanded outwards into different countries in Europe. And then at some point we thought, okay, well, if this is an idea that works on the local level and on the national level, we can scale it, right? There's no reason why someone would not want to meet someone else from a completely different country. We have these common issues. We should be debating them as well. So that's where Europe Talks came from, the idea. Started that in 2019, and in the last year we had 23 media partners from all over Europe. I think around 20,000 people signed up, and just the same process. Answer the questions, meet someone who thinks differently, have a one-on-one conversation. And it also has the added function of, kind of piling on what you said, Francesco, of journalists need to get out of their bubble and speak to new people. And it's always really easy, I think, to think like, okay, here's a political issue, why don't we just interview a politician? Why don't we interview a sociologist or a political science professor? But it's really hard to find that person, the shopkeeper, the mechanic, the bus driver, not to, lean on stereotypes, but those are the people who are often disenfranchised and don't often have access to speak to journalists, and vice versa. So that's also the layer that we add underneath, where we've really kept this a media project on purpose, because we feel like the other half of the added benefit is people speaking to journalists and journalists speaking to people, even more importantly.
And what has been the impact of the project so far, if you have any data about?
Yeah, I mean, there's the data side. So we have metrics. We can see that, like 90% of people are happy with their conversation. 60% of people say they keep in touch with their partner. But we also have done 2 academic studies on the actual impact of the conversation, because it is just one time. It's kind of like one touch point for 2 people. But there does seem to be at least a statistically significant effect of reducing polarization, both like ideological polarization, so I'm not so firm in my position anymore, but also affective polarization, which is I no longer see you as my enemy. And I think that on the empathy side is really where we've had the most impact of just getting people into that space of being willing to collaborate further when it is really politically relevant, when it's not an off-cycle year, when it's not just a one-on-one conversation, but it's going to the polls, speaking about policy, that kind of thing.
Okay. I will start the second round from you. Are you considering a new project about the division that we are seeing in the debate about the war in Ukraine?
Yeah, we actually have. So in Germany, we've started a new round of Germany Talks, which is where we started, so we do this every year. But all of the questions right now are focused on Ukraine, both on the country of Ukraine and what's happening with the war, but also German policies and politics and the impact. So everything from, is it right that Germany is delivering like massive weapons to Ukraine, to should we drive slower on the Autobahn because gas is an issue in Germany now? And then hopefully we will keep that conversation going on a European level, and just obviously seeing what happens in the coming months. We do have a project coming up that will be global, so we're going to scale it to the World Talks. And I can't imagine a situation in which this isn't a key piece of the conversation for that event.
Are you collaborating with any media on this project? Or?
We will. It's quite far in the future, so it's in spring of next year, but we're forming a steering committee now, if anybody's interested. And it will be, of course, a media project, because that's really what we believe is where we should be working.
I would like to ask both to Francesco and Andres, what does Europe have to change in order to have a common interest, and that is not determined only by national interest? I mean, we will meet at some point and speak about a common European interest, not affected by our own national views.
You want to come
Please,
first?
no, go ahead. Go ahead, please.
Please.
Well, that's quite interesting, because I've been in many briefings with the diplomats in Spain or whatever, and you have colleagues that ask to the source, and then what will we get from this negotiation? So the journalists became a we, as a country or as a government or as a party in the negotiation. But also in our media, or even our readers, in my case, they like the sense of how this issue that they are discussing in Brussels or bargaining in Brussels can affect me. And this is also a thing that the journalists should do, no? How to make understandable for your reader that what is happening there is affecting directly to this person. Like I know the reform of the energy market is not the same as in Spain, where the government is fighting for this, and maybe in another country, or the issue with the sanctions, with the petrol is not with the oil is not the same in Germany or Hungary than in Spain. But well, what should we change? I think that it's important for us to have time. I mean, to maybe a bit of long term, to take a breath, to reflect a bit what we are doing, and then this is easy if we can have this a bit of more time to think about the work we are doing. It's probably easy to find a broader scope. If we are running from the European Parliament to the European Council to the European Commission to the European Court of Justice and the playbook of Politicalo, and then the easy thing is to translate everything to the Spanish audience. Also, what happens in Brussels, that you have the diplomats from the 27 ministers all the time, the presidents of the government, so it's very easy to ask them about Spanish things. No? This is, well, I think that this is what we should do. But there in Brussels, many times you see the British journalists with the Brexit always asking about the same thing, the Spanish always talking about the same thing, the Italians with the Mede always do the same thing. Well, we should change that conversation, sure.
Yeah, I think also we have to acknowledge that Europe is an imperfect construction by design, right? So the national interests will always collide in Europe. The magic in Brussels happens when these national interests, however conflicting, come to some sort of conclusion which is never the best, or is second best or third best, but is nevertheless a solution in the interest of the European people. What's kind of distasteful in Brussels is that often the things that hold up things, including the latest one with the sanctions, are very petty local issues, right? But that's almost physiological in an organization of that nature. By the way, in the United States, it happens too. Like, in the Senate, one state, one vote. So, two senators per state. I mean, the Michigan blocks stuff that they don't like, or California blocks stuff that they don't like. So that happens in other, even more federalist institutions. So I think the main issue for Europe, and I lay the blame for that at Brussels, like the Brexit press. I will say that they don't do a good enough job of explaining what they do well, and why that is sometimes in the interest of all the countries. I think the national countries don't do a good job of explaining why they gave up perhaps something in order to achieve a common European goal, be it the sanctions against Putin or a better way to sell cars in the European Union. There's many things that Brussels does. The biggest problem is the democratic deficit in Brussels. So the biggest criticism, which I think is valid in Brussels, is there's a bunch of people that nobody elected wielding enormous power. They need to find an answer to that. And in many years of knocking around Brussels, I never found a good answer, right? They don't seem to have a good answer. The only answer is that the councils should have more power because at least they've been elected somehow, right? It's true. They haven't been elected to do that, if you think about it. They've been elected to do other stuff on national politics. So the biggest problem that I see Europe has in terms of explaining its reason of being is that. I give an example, a positive example. The Eurozone, the creation of the euro, the purpose there is clear, right? They're there to do one thing. They can do it well or they can do it badly, but there's one thing. They fight there's hawks and doves and whatever, and the Germans always hate inflation, and the Italians love stimulus. But in reality, then they come to a conclusion that is more or less good for the whole European compact. So it's possible. It's just it's easier to do on a single currency because it's one issue, and it's an economic issue. Yeah.
And Catherine and James, even if you already answered a bit before, I would like to ask you, as editor of Europe at The Guardian, what topics topics of conversation are truly European?
I mean, we've mentioned that Europe has been in a state of almost permanent crisis for the last 10 years. And there are connections between those crises, from the financial crash to the Eurozone crisis, to Brexit, to the pandemic and so on. Throughout these years, there's been connections, like what happened to the austerity years after the financial crash, Eurozone crisis, that had an impact on the political landscape in Southern Europe, and likewise decisions taken around the economy in Britain probably fed into Brexit. In France, we saw the rise of the Gilets jaunes in 2017. They were saying exactly the same things that the people in Britain who voted for Brexit were saying. So, there are new dividing lines that we're seeing all the time, and I think it's the onus on us as journalists is to try and establish those connections and make clear where the patterns are and join the dots, as James was saying. The topics that are truly European are the big ticket issues, like the climate emergency. Yeah. How are we going to, reduce dependence on fossil fuels? How are we going to meet our targets? How are we going to do all that right now when there's an inflation bubble? There's a cost of living crisis everywhere that's becoming, quite frightening for people. Are they going to accept the pretty demanding changes that are going to be required to respond to the climate emergency? How is that going to be managed politically? We see a backlash against some green taxes and fuel measures. Is the politics of net zero going to be the next big kind of Brexit-type situation? So climate, I think that's such and of course it reaches into our addiction to importing oil from Russia and, Germany's coal addiction. All of these things are connected. Climate, the recovery from the pandemic obviously is something that affects all of us, and again speaks to inflation and just how we live. So I think those are the big pressing things. We can't avoid the climate emergency, and that's just got to, and that will dictate a lot of the decisions we make, which will have to be made at European level. Transport, food systems. How do we produce food? How do we, what do we eat? So, the issue of Ukraine obviously has, revitalized the EU in many ways, and it has revitalized NATO, and that's because we suddenly again see our interdependence. We rely on each other for our security. So the war is that geopolitical shock it's having is, people may not be happy with the direction that the EU is taking, but it can't be avoided, and so those big issues I think will be the ones that dominate. And as I say, they're all connected.
Yeah. And James, if you want to add something about this issue of the difficulty to find also European topics of conversation.
Yes, I mean, in truth, I think this one's slightly easier for a publication like Politico to answer, because our raison d'etre is a European conversation about politics and policy, if you like. But I think it is a bit harder for national publications because, the adage is, all news is local. You have to make what you're talking about relevant to your readers, perhaps not going quite to the extent of your Italian sports publication, but, something like that to make sure it hits home with your readers. And the challenge is to include the European context so they can really understand all aspects of it. And, that's really difficult to do in 500 or 600 words. So it's not easy. But I was thinking, I'm glad you prompted us with this question beforehand, because it gave me a bit of time to think. And I came up with, I think it's 5 sort of baskets, more thematic baskets, but including a lot of the things you've already talked about, Catherine. I think environment and climate is definitely one. Yeah. Obviously has to be addressed on a European level. And I don't necessarily mean Brussels institutions, but Europe writ large. Obviously, it's a global conversation too, but that's one of them. I think you could cut these in different ways, but I think there's something around, democratic values, nationalism, populism, and this sort of assault on that from both within Europe and from outside of Europe. So, the tussle between the democratic world and the authoritarian world in the form of Moscow and Beijing is clearly going to be a huge theme and sort of sucks in lots of current news items. The cost of living crisis is one that is going to is definitely a European conversation, and all of the linkages around supply chains and inflation and so on. Europe's kind of power, soft and hard, in the world, the European economy, strategic autonomy, all of those questions all together. And lastly, one that Politico doesn't get that involved in, and I personally don't know, it's not really my specialism, but I think there's probably something around European cultural values or a European cultural space. Yeah. Although, ironically, I feel like there isn't much of that is truly pan-European. The only one that I can think of is Eurovision, which... is genuinely pan-European and sort of wonderful in its way, but there's probably more to it than that. Yeah. But anyway, there's some. I think that's probably that were the 5 that I can think of anyway.
Yeah. Thank you so much. We have 5 minutes left, so I would like to have some question from the public. At least I think we have time for a couple of questions. No one? Sí. ¿El micro? Sí.
Gracias, enhorabuena por la iniciativa. Creo que hacen falta muchas más jornadas como esta para que la idea de Europa, para que la opinión pública europea vaya creciendo, vaya afianzándose. Y en la medida en que esa opinión pública vaya creciendo y vaya afianzándose, pues iremos construyendo un demos europeo, que creo que es lo que no tenemos en este momento. Cuando se habla de las dificultades para crear una opinión pública europea, siempre hablamos de la dificultad de la lengua, ¿no? 23 lenguas complica que se vaya avanzando en esa creación de la opinión pública. Pero hay más cosas que no es solo la lengua, aunque afortunadamente hay muchas iniciativas paneuropeas como las que hoy estamos viendo aquí. Sería interesante, por ejemplo, que después de la reunión del Consejo Europeo no hubiera 27 ruedas de prensa con los jefes de Estado y de Gobierno de cada uno de los socios comunitarios. Sería interesante que saliera Charles Michel y diera una rueda de prensa únicamente Charles Michel para contar la opinión del Consejo y dedicarle a lo mejor o organizar las ruedas de prensa nacionales 1 hora o 2 horas después, por lo menos que hubiera 1 o 2 horas en las que hubiera un mensaje europeo fluyendo por los medios de comunicación. Y sería interesante también que los periodistas, entre los que me cuento, sería interesante que, en lugar de preguntar siempre a los políticos sobre temas europeos, ampliáramos el espectro y preguntáramos también a la sociedad civil. Eso haría que las lecturas no fueran nacionales, pequeñitas, cicateras, ¿no? Y tuvieran otra mirada mucho más amplia. Gracias.
Muchas gracias. He's saying that it would be great if after the European Council we will have just one press conference and not 27 press conferences, if Charles Michel will come out and speak for everyone, and the importance to build this European demos also through these initiatives and a new form of functioning of the European institution, more or less.
Charles Michel would love that.
Yeah, I'm sure.
He can talk for 27 times.
Yeah.
And he can.
Yeah. He can.
I mean, I guess to push back slightly on that idea, I feel like you would be missing something of the European demos if you tried to sum up that, because I mean, as you were saying, it's about the council functions by national interests competing and colliding and coming up with often a very imperfect compromise. And I don't think you can understand that if you just presented with the results. Yeah. I think the process, opening up the sausage factory and understanding why the sausages were that shape and that color is part of it, I feel.
Yeah. Microphone? Yeah. It works? I think so. Yeah,
okay.
It's okay.
I think there is a good point, though, about identity and affiliation to the idea of Europe. I was really struck at the beginning of the pandemic when there was, it wasn't Europe's finest hour, and there was a really marked lack of solidarity between Northern Europe and Southern Europe. And I remember speaking to some Italian students and asking them, do you feel... there was another reason for the conversation, but in the course of it, we asked them, how do you feel about Europe in the pandemic? And one of them said, don't make me laugh. I think you die twice before the EU is going to rescue you. You wait for the first time to have a meeting, and then the second time to figure out how they're going to fund this help for you. And I found that really shocking, actually, because it was, I know Italy was a founder member, and these young people had grown up with, had no memory of a time before the Eurozone. They had no memory of a time before freedom of movement, before Erasmus programs, and all these things that have worked to, create a European identity. So it was a very damaging time, and I know that after that, subsequently, Europe did kind of get its act together, but it did make me think anyway about that whole question of how do you, at what level do people feel that their interests are best defended? And I think when it's a life and death situation, maybe it's your regional or your national authorities. They have to be the first port of call. Europe has a different function, so it's very difficult to get that balance right.
Thank you. I think we are out of time already, so thank you so much. Thank you.